All right, let's get started. It's 10 o'clock. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Paya Levine. I'm the Assistant Director of the Planning Department for the County of Santa Cruz. And I'm here with some colleagues. I'll introduce them as we go through the presentation. But thanks again so much for checking in. So today the topic that we're presenting on is one aspect of the rebuilding process, that having to do with the environmental health topics of septic and water systems. I am just realizing that my camera is not on. Now I can introduce myself properly. Good morning. Marcus, can you begin to go forward with the slides?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Paya. Hate to
Yes,
interrupt.
Marilyn.
I thought I was going to do a little intro here. Is it not till
yes,
later?
I was going to come to that, but this is a fine place to do that. So let me just tell everyone who you are. This is Dr. Marilyn Underwood. She is the director of the environmental health group of the county, and she's going to give a short intro. Thank you, Marilyn.
Sure. Maybe I'm out of turn here. I'm not sure. We're still practicing this. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And I just wanted to say, typically we have a lot of work in our county in environmental health dealing with over 23,000 septic systems, parcels with septic systems on them that are doing upgrades and repairs. And so when this burn unfortunately happened and affected you all, the county wanted to be able to make it an easier path to rebuilding, and obviously adding that additional workload of having over 900 properties come to us in addition to our normal workload, was recognized that we would need assistance. And so we're very thankful to be able to be working with Four Leaf, a company that has some reputation and great reputation from working in other places in similar situations. And so you'll be hearing from them today, but I just wanted to let you know. So again, when you're processing and needing environmental health coverage for septic, coming out back after a fire, it will be handled through the Recovery Permit Center, which is being handled by Four Leaf and not by our division, because we still have this additional workload that's already coming in. So I just wanted to let you know, and with that, hey! And so with that, I'll let Marcus, I think, take it away from here.
I think Paya has a few, let's get into some
Sure.
meeting protocol.
Thank you very much. In a virtual meeting, we all have to be sort of extra respectful of each other and being careful to stay muted unless you are asking a question and you've been recognized in the question and answer period. So thank you very much in advance for that. Please know the meeting is being recorded and the chat will be preserved. So anything you miss, would like to go back to, or want to share with someone who was not at this meeting, it will be on the website and available. Please hold your questions until after the presentation. The presentation is going to have a lot of information in it, and we may cover many of the things folks have questions about. At least I hope we do. And when you do ask your questions, which we are more than happy to answer, we're going to look for the general in your questions. A lot of this topic is very site specific, and to the extent that you have questions that pertain only to your property and your situation, we're really happy to answer them either offline or at the end, but let's address the questions that address the greater group first. So there's a couple of ways that you can make comments and ask questions. One will be using the chat function, or there is a raise your hand function, and I will be scanning for those raised hands when the time comes. Again, let's not interrupt each other, one question at a time. And the other thing is you'll hear this as we go through, but just kind of a constant invitation to call the Recovery Permit Center, email the Recovery Permit Center, or self-schedule an appointment with them. That's where we can best give you attention for your particulars. Next slide, please, Marcus. So the agenda for today is we'll do some housekeeping. We'll go through septic system basics. That is both about the regulations that apply and the kinds of systems. You probably all know more about septic systems already than you ever hoped to. We will cover the process for getting a septic permit, and then we'll have questions. And I did want to assure everybody that if we go over 11:30 and there are more questions, we'll stay and answer them. Next slide, Marcus. So we've talked about the reason we're here. It's basically to get you information that you need to get through the process. And we're here to assist that. And the more you know and understand about it, the better. So that's the reason for this meeting. I've already introduced myself. My name is Paya Levine. Dr. Underwood is on board, and the staff from the Recovery Permit Center, which for those of you who don't know is kind of a separate place, actual and virtual, for permitting for fire rebuilders. So you're not in the mix with the regular system, and you have a team of people who are, specific to your issues. And one of the chief of those people is Marcus Johnson. He's with the Four Leaf Consulting Group, but he's representing the county, and we're all the county, at this point working together. So take it away, Marcus.
All right. Well, thanks for having me this morning, and thanks for spending a little bit of time in the morning. It's for some maybe a little earlier than most, but thanks for being out here. We have some pretty good information. So I'm Marcus Johnson with Four Leaf and with the County of Santa Cruz. I'm the Director of Operations for the RPC, and helping to put together the whole kind of permitting system in general and getting people from start to finish the best way possible with all the rules and regulations that kind of overlap. So I'll be going over kind of the main purposes of why septic is so important and what we're protecting with the septic systems. And I'll just kind of jump right into it. So a large part of the county, as Dr. Underwood talked about, 23,000 or so septic systems throughout the county, and a large area of the CZU burn portion are on septic. Probably 70–80%, I would say, something high like that. But a lot of those properties, what they are, that they are on a septic system, and they have either a private water source, a well, they're pulling their water off a spring box, or even in some cases from a creek. So really what we're doing as with the septic system is protecting the water sources and the waterways. If we kind of look at this map here, we have what we're looking at is old tanks, broken tanks, stuff like that. Just basically protecting those aquifers and underground water sources. The leach field out here, same thing that acts as draining the property through. And really what we're doing is protecting the nitrogen levels and other contaminants into these waterways that could affect natural habitats, fish, wildlife, and then just our normal protection of not drinking contaminated water. So Paya talked a little bit about at the beginning where we're going to get into some of the code section. I know this is a lot drier subject than most people want to hear, so I've kind of summarized the main section and the main areas of the sewage disposal part of the code. And so really what we're all kind of living in the same section of in-kind versus adding adding waste or load to a system, and what you kind of heard and what you haven't heard. So basically in the septic world, you have a 500 square foot kind of a one-time addition of habitable space that doesn't include a bedroom increase. So I know you've heard 10% and a bunch of other numbers kind of all over the board, but as far as in the septic world, it's a 500 square foot habitable square footage that we're looking at. And this section 7.38.080, existing systems. So what we're trying to do is review the existing system as it was functional prior to the fire and line it up to what the proposed rebuilds are. So a lot of stuff we're looking for is to make sure that the system was functional, that it was in an adequate area, and there was a the legal structure. It was a legal permitted system. So one thing that helps with this is there's a 1 acre minimum on new development for septic. That actually doesn't apply for structures that were legalized prior. So that's kind of one thing where an exception we're using for a lot of the properties that in a normal scenario wouldn't even be allowed to, would have to meet that acre minimum. So as part of that section, section 3 talks about the occupied structures after a calamity. So like I said, we're looking at the legality of the system, making sure it's sized properly. One little caveat is we do have some of the smaller lots, and you're an owner that happens to own some of those lots. We'll try to get them bundled together and put together to create as big of a lot as possible. And it's a pretty streamlined system with the assessor. It's just some paperwork so we can kind of combine those lots to kind of help the situation. And in the long term, it would help with expansion areas and repairs if it ever came to that. So, let me go to the next slide. So we're going to get right into conventional systems, which most people have currently, and kind of the inner workings of how they work, the components. And see, I made my pointer a little bit bigger so everybody can kind of see what we're all talking about. So the biggest thing, so we have the house, we have your septic tanks that go into, the tank holds the solids, separates the effluents and the liquids, and then comes out into your, in most cases, there's a distribution box. In some of the older systems, there's a valve to distribute the liquid effluents through the leech lines. So the leech lines act as a filter. They filter as much as possible. Some are chamber, some are rock filled, but they basically filter that effluents through their chambers, through a rock system, and then through the soils. And basically we're using the earth as a filter to basically clean that water before it gets back into our groundwaters, aquifers, and basically we're recharging the groundwater at that point. Big thing is over here you see the groundwater well. So that's really what we're protecting, is making sure we're not drinking contaminated water either from a neighbor, upstream, downstream, that kind of stuff. So that's really what a conventional system is doing, and they're usually gravity fed. Everything's rolling downhill, and it just kind of over time clears the waters. One thing is you'll see after the fire, running tests on some of these leech lines, most of them will hold water and are doing great. The reason is the soil's been allowed to kind of dry out and recharge itself. So just kind of a heads up when we're doing some of these pre-clearances and we're saying kind of hold off on some of those pumping reports and run in the water. It's because it's kind of giving a false reading right now, just because they're running a small 20-minute load of water versus a continuous load of a house. So we just want to make sure people aren't getting that false sense of security on those 20-minute leech line tests versus when the house is built and it's on under a full load. So the standard system kind of went over the picture, but it's basically to treat the wastewater, take the solids, the effluents, separate them, and then that goes through, filters through the leech lines, and then ultimately gets all the way through and back through the earth and back into your drinking waters and waterways. So the first component coming out the house is your septic system. It's a buried tank. They come in their concrete, polyurethane. I always trip up on that word. Fiberglass. And there's a list of standard of tanks that are approved through the county, and I have that a little further along in the presentation. But basically what the tanks do is you have the inlet of the waste and water that comes in, and two chamber systems. You have the sludge, which basically breaks down at the bottom, and then you'll have like greases and stuff that floats to the top, so a lot of kitchen waste. stays at the top, and then the effluent water comes back, and it's a gravity fed. So one tank fills up, pushes the water through, and then out. Some tanks you'll have effluent filters. They just help clear out and clean out, and those over time get changed and cleared out. So what they're ultimately pumping out is when these sludge levels and scum levels get high. That's really what they're pumping out of the tanks when you have that annual maintenance. The risers, so you'll see the risers. Some are plastic, some are concrete. You'll have rated versus unrated. So if your tank was under like a driveway, you'd have rated concrete lids versus some plastic lids. They basically take from the top of the tank, get you access to these two inspection chambers, so they could pop that open and see what's kind of going on inside the tank. But ultimately, it's separating the sludge from the scum. The effluence goes out, pushes through the chambers, pushes back out, and then from on the outlet side, it's distributing to the leech lines. So within the code, the sewage code, there's a section that talks about septic tanks. A lot of people have a 1,500 gallon tank. That's been a county standard for quite a while, maybe early 80s, Maryland, somewhere around there. It's been a while. So you'll see most of the properties over time have had a replacement and had a 1,500 gallon tank put in. The tank's size helps with the bedroom count. It's not the only factor though with sizing a system. So a 1,500 gallon tank is good for 1 to 4 bedrooms. If you had a bigger house, then there's a additional 250 gallon capacity for the tank. So you'll see as a bedroom count goes out, the tank will get larger. We talked about the 2 chambers. So the county, in Santa Cruz County, there's a 2-chamber system, and then the distance of the manhole. So when we get to the list of approved tanks for the county, all of them have been vetted to meet these requirements. So here's the list, and actually there's a link to the list. All the local vendors pretty much carry all these tanks, but you have the three types, their sizes, and what they're approved for. Most of them we see is concrete, and fiberglass is probably the most common ones we're seeing. And just know the 2 fiberglass and polyethylene tanks, we've seen probably some of the most damages. So we're starting to see tank repairs just for those particular tanks. Either the tops melted or the risers melted into the body, and there is an ability just to replace that portion of the tank. So we get into the leech lines. So the leech lines actually are really the determining factors of the size of your septic system. So we talked about most people have 1,500 gallon tank. Obviously that size for 4 bedrooms for capacity gallon wise. But the real kind of star of the show is the leech lines. So they're going to be taking that effluence from the tank and processing that through the earth and clearing that water. And so the size of your leaching field the separation between the groundwater aquifers and the top and the bottom of the leach trenches. So you'll hear from time to time we'll do rainy season tests, because that's a better determination of how high the water tables get in relation to the bottom of the leach lines. Percolation rates, which is basically the ability of the soils to receive that discharge water and the speed of it. So usually you want to kind of live in the middle in a medium kind of perk type. Too fast or too slow really isn't that great. And then also the type of soils. So sandy soils, clay soils, they all have different capacities when we're talking about percolation. And also just the space that you have on your land. So there's, on top of having the required leach field space, you need to have 100% expansion. So that's where a lot of systems and the geology and the terrain of the land really doesn't help in a rocky soil or or you have too steep uphill downhills where you really can't use the those particular areas. So the space in the expansion area basically is kind of a like for like area. It's very well, we know that that particular area is in common with the leaching, percolation, the groundwater levels that we have the system in now. And then also the ultimate size of the leech lines, which is the depth, the width, and the length. So getting into the kind of went over this, the termination factors. So the soils, the water levels. There's also setbacks that go into it to wells, springs, waterways. Has to do with it, and that those some have changed over time. We've had new wells put in that maybe too close or that popped up. There's and then the level of water. So like we talked about the rainy season and the winter season where we just have higher water levels. We went over the expansion areas. So the big thing about the expansion area is there's also you're kind of relegating that space as unbuildable as far as it's being set aside for the septic purposes. You can always build in those areas. We would just have to at some point reestablish a new expansion area. So when you're kind of laying out the properties and looking for it, that's one thing you want to think is if you have any future development that you're looking at, and in relation to where that expansion area is. So that's kind of a big one when you're realigning and resetting up your site plans, is to where kind of all this will line up, because not having the expansion area is one of the big tickets to not meeting a standard system and putting you kind of in another realm that we'll get in a little later in the presentation. So here is the percolation rates and square footage, and the square footage is the square footage of leach, not necessarily square footage of the house. So it's the actual square footage of the leech lines, the length, width, and depth. So and you can see, so like I said earlier in the presentation, you'll see I have a 1,500 gallon tank, but maybe I only have 600 square foot of leach. So that's telling us that system is set up for a 1-bedroom house. We also have seen, and like Pius talked about earlier in the presentation, is that every lot, it's very site specific. And even within the site specific, the construction of the septic system is very specific. And you'll see some systems that are permitted for a 2-bedroom, but actually were built for a larger system. And the records will indicate that they were built for a 2-bedroom, but they have the 1,500 gallon tank, and they put in a 1,050 square foot of leach. So it's very specific to the records and the history of what was established when developing the properties. So then what we get into kind of the second type of system. So the conventional systems, usually gravity fed, good percolation rates. We have space. The water table isn't too high. Then we get into the non-standard and advanced treatment type of systems. So basically a non-standard system is anything that doesn't meet all the criteria of a standard system. And they also use other technologies, either advanced alternative technologies, filtration systems, monitoring panels, things in that nature, that just don't meet the necessary. They're basically adding or reclarifying the water prior to it. Some of the examples of a non-standard systems are alternative systems. So they basically utilize additional technologies. These ones help with the flow for adding bedrooms and adding size to your specific system. Then we have limited expansion, and as we talked about, not having 100% expansion on your systems. They basically are using a pre-clarification systems, remove or raising the level of the leach, like a mound systems or filtration systems, so that they're reducing the actual amount of leech lines that you would need. So by basically pre-treating the system, the waters that come out of the tank, they're reducing the ultimate level and length, depth, and width of leech lines. So whatever's coming in out on the back end is a lot cleaner, and going through the soils, it's clarified at a faster rate because it's already a lot cleaner. I just kind of get into, so limited expansion kind of continued is we'll see that on existing systems where they'll be adding to, maybe it was a standard system and for whatever reason we can't meet setbacks. So that's what we'll see usually be done to a system to create a addition or an additional bedroom in those particular areas. Now, when we start talking about limited expansion, there's other parts to it. So these systems don't need what they call annual maintenance inspection fees like some of the other ones where we're going to get into with advanced treatment. So we'll see probably a lot of this on the upgrade side of it, on a lot of the systems, as far as we're going to basically make the best out of what we have in the technologies we can use. Then we do have low flow systems. Same thing. These have the same. We're adding components to it. The difference with this is now we're using low flow system where we're conserving water. We're using it as a means. We're not pumping as much water into the system, so you still have the ability to do the additions. This one comes with annual fees and maintenance that get put onto the tax bill to make sure we're still in the water conservation, we're meeting the water conservation measures, it's still working properly. So the way this system basically works is we're just cutting down the effluent water that we're putting into the system with low flow toilets, limiting faucet and water consumption. So then we get into the advanced treatment systems. So basically these systems we'll see, especially in the burn area, we're in watershed areas, we have sandy soils, we have areas of slow perk, fast perk, and then we're just the terrain. We have very steep slopes, small lots, and then restrictions on waterways, banks. It's a tricky area septic wise. There's a lot of factors that go into it. So basically an advanced treatment system adds extra components, treats the effluents more efficiently, and that totally you'll see that the leach line areas go way down. The installation is a little more expensive. There's a consultant that has to design it, and there's additional testing and inspections and annual maintenance and basically an annual operating permit that goes along with these particular types of systems. So the goal of the advanced treatment systems is they take the biochemical oxygen demand, the BOD. I know it's a lot. Suspends the soils and the nitrogen levels. So basically, what we're doing is we're super processing the waters before it goes out. And so that's why these systems, they have a lot more components that go along with them to achieve that. So on the back end, the water is a lot cleaner. It can, when it gets through the soil, it's clarifying. It doesn't need that ultimate separation that you would need for a conventional system. This list here is some of the approved type technologies of some of the systems that you'll see in advanced treatment. And then we'll kind of go through some examples. So like a sand filter systems, we see quite a bit in this particular area. And basically what it does, it's kind of recirculates. It pumps the effluents up through basically a concrete, like a sandbox for the basically a sandbox that pumps through, kind of takes that concept of using soils to clarify on a conventional system, limits it into this kind of sandbox. It filters through there and then recirculates itself back out and then back into the disposal fields. So it's basically kind of looping itself and clearing itself before it comes back out and goes to an ultimate disposal systems. And then we have a mound system. So these the ones we're going over, just kind of ones we see a little more in the area. So a mound system, basically what we're doing is we have a pump tank and we're creating additional layer to get that separation between the groundwater and more treatment area. So it discharges through the trenches and the filters. We're creating a sand layer, a rock layer, and we're basically lifting where this normal discharge point would be. We're lifting it up and creating more space to clarify the effluents going through the soil. So we're basically creating a better condition higher up, and we're creating the sand, the rock, the soil, the gravel that would be required, and then giving it basically more time and giving it help as it clarifies through the soil. It's like, and this picture might be small, but basically we're lifting up those leech lines above ground. We're basically creating a mound system to clarify this through a created area that we're creating back down, and then before it gets to the filter. So the biggest thing about all these systems is we're finding ways to clarify the water before it goes back into the natural soil. So drip systems, basically about the same. We're limiting the system. It's a pump tank. We're clarifying it, and then we're limiting the effluents into the speed of the effluents back into the system. So we're slowing it down, and we're dripping it through at a slower speed is what we're really doing. So we're still clarifying it. We're still cleaning it. The fields get a little bit bigger, but we're staying a lot higher, kind of like imagine at a sprinkler level. We're a lot higher. We're not as deep in the soils as you would be at with a normal leech line. And what we're doing is we're slowly dripping the effluents back into the soils. So we're just really at that point controlling what's going in and how fast it's going in to allow the absorption to happen. Big subject is ADUs and septic. So I understand most people want to take advantage, maximize their properties, and add an ADU. So we'll see in a lot of the pre-clearances, we'll see that there is an ADU, a JDU, a new house, and the thought is to downsize the house from a 3 to 2 bedroom and add that 1 bedroom into an ADU, which in theory sounds like it'll work, but there is a requirements for the ADU to have its own sewage disposal system. So the ADU has to have a minimum 1,500 gallon tank. It's the county standard for minimum. And then the ADU leaching is calculated not just by bedroom, but there's also the loads of the kitchen, laundry room, and just the generic space, just like a normal house would be. So we're not just taking that leach field bedroom size. There's also normal living loads that have to be accounted for on your ADU. So with properties that are larger than 2 acres, you have the ability to add a completely separate system to that ADU. So you have 2 separately functioning systems, one for the house, one size appropriate for the house, one size appropriate for the ADU. Properties that are less than 2 acres, you have to add that other tank, and then the leaching requirement of determining the ultimate leaching area for both the house and the ADU. So with that in mind, you're thinking of that 100% expansion. So we might either have to add leech lines, or you start getting into some of the non-standard systems advanced treatment systems to limit the size of those leach lines. And that comes down to what we talked about earlier, is just having space for that 100% replacement. Like I said, I'm seeing a lot of them on the pre-clearances, and understand that people want to maximize, and if you're going to do it, now's the time. So phasing the projects. So when we start getting into the pre-clearances, submitting for the different pre-clearances, you can note that there's an ADU. Time-wise is going to be the biggest factor on that. Are you going to build it concurrently with the house? Are you going to build it before? Are you going to build it after? And kind of that time frame. So building the ADU first, conceivably you could connect to the existing septic system. In most cases, the existing septic system is going to be large enough to accommodate an ADU. Pre-planning and setting up that phase construction to be successful is going to be important on this one. So if you're connecting to your house, your existing house system to build your ADU first, space-wise, being able to locate the wherever the new system's going to be. In a lot of cases, where the ADU is going to be versus where the house is and where the septic system is, it's going to get tricky to get that connection and get the flow into a conventional system. So the layout of the site plan is going to be huge at this particular point. And then also determining if you want to size to either do a new system, and like we talked about on the slide before, is the size of your property. So 2 acres. 2 acres is a little easier. You have the ability to do 2 separate systems. When you're less than 2 acres, it's going to get a little trickier. So at this particular point, you're going to really kind of want to get your septic design and figure out what you want to do ahead of time before you build the ADU first. Just because you're going to have access point issues, and then expansion issues, where all that's going to go, and just to know that maybe to do both of them, ultimately you're going to need to maybe get into an advanced treatment type system or a non-standard type system. So just kind of knowing ahead of time that the cost of those bigger systems, those more expensive type systems is going to be coming in the future. But connecting to your existing system to get the ADU built first, that's definitely an option up front. Building the main house and the ADU, or building the main house and building the ADU, kind of normal standard process is what we see all over the county. You build your main house, the septic system sized appropriately. When the ADU comes in, it's that 2 options. If you do have enough space, you can obviously do a separate system for that, or have that system sized accordingly. But knowing that that's coming in and you're less than 2 acres, it's really, I can't stress this enough, it's just knowing the space that you're going to need for an ultimate system size that large and getting access to it to build it. So having your house built and then your leach lines behind the house you've just built is going to be a lot tougher than when you haven't set up anything yet to get to those particular leach lines. And just knowing that you're going to be getting into it. Building them at the same time, we kind of talked about that before. It's really dependent on knowing the size, your property size, your ability, and the expansion, being able to have expansion for both of those systems, and being able to have enough property for the size of both systems. So really, when you want to start getting with the ADUs, it's just kind of pre-planning, getting that information ahead of time, and when you're going to that point, when you're doing the pre-application meetings, just what's the ultimate goal? It's easier to kind of know, hey, I want to do what the grand scheme of everything is, and maybe we're not going to hold you to that time frame, but just kind of knowing when in a list of events when this is going to happen, so we can help you kind of at least have that information of what systems and where you're going to be with those particular type of systems in relation to an ADU. So getting into the environmental pre-clearances. So as part of all the rebuilds, there's a pre-clearance that has to happen. And what it is you have environmental, geology, and fire. As far as the environmental side, we are looking for whether the disposal system was properly sized for in kind. If it's not properly sized, what the new rebuild is going to consist of, and what will be needed to construct that sewage disposal system. We also check permit history through environmental health documents, building permits, assessors, and we pull the hard files just to get any and all information. So when it comes to that and a plot plan that's associated with it, we're confirming setbacks from the disposal systems to the rebuilds, groundwater, creek, wells, and I know Dr. Underwood has something in the work for the properties on 236 that that will help in those cases too.
Did you want me to say something right now, Marcus?
Oh yeah. So
yeah, okay. So one of the things we know that some of the properties specifically along the 236 are constrained by size and also by setbacks to streams. And again, in rebuild, there is the consideration that you do have to meet 2017 setbacks to streams. So and wells, as we already mentioned. So one of the things we had been already kind of working on bringing back was the concept of sewering Boulder Creek downtown area. And this is partly because of such the constraints that, I don't know if you're aware of it, but a lot of it is on holding tanks, and it has to be pumped quite often in the commercial area. And so that brings quite a cost and does limit the ability to do any kind of improvements in the downtown Boulder Creek area. So we have been starting to work on a study to look at what's the ability to bring that sewage from the downtown area up to the CSA 7A, I think it is, at the golf course, pre-treatment, and then leach fields that are over there. And we asked during that study, because it was already in the works, we are now exploring the idea of being able to provide the same sewer, tying into the sewer line, because it's going to be coming up along the 236 anyways. That's where the pipeline would go, to allow that to some of the folks along the burn area, in the burn zone. And what it would mean is that legally what we would allow is people to go ahead and to rebuild, as long as their system was healthy, using the existing system. Something we would record on your deed that if a sewer line is available within 5 years or some period of time, then you would then be required to hook up to it. And the good thing about being able to do this is you would not have to put in a very expensive enhanced treatment system in at this time to rebuild. And our penciling out, where it looked like this is still an unknown, but obviously we want to get some infrastructure funds to help pay for this. So we have been reaching out as part of some of the Rebuild America funding that is happening at the federal level. We're also exploring various types of grants that are available for post-fire, post-disaster events through FEMA and other entities. So it's still coming together. Obviously, we don't have anything that we can actually talk about concretely, but we're trying to move to, I understand that people will be coming in from those parcels soon to the recovery permit center. So we're trying to fast forward and see if we can make something like this available to those folks. Otherwise, it would put those many folks along that 236 corridor into an enhanced treatment system just to rebuild like for like. And so that's about all I know at this time, but we'll keep you informed for sure.
Thank you for the update. So getting back into the environmental health pre-clearances, a big portion of it is a plot plan. There we go. And this might be a little tough, so I have the link associated with it. So the plot plans, I know, seeing this list, it's about 24 items. It's a little bit from all the departments, as far as assessor parcel, vicinity maps, a scale, topography contours, all that kind of. It seems like a lot. Below, or the next few slides, I'm going to show you a few different types of plot plans that we're getting. A lot of that information can be gotten from the county GIS. At the very end, I have some links of where to find this information, and then we can help you pull together this information at the RPC to help create some of these plot plans. So I think this is off of can't think of the name of the website, but it's there's a few websites out there that basically take your information and they create you a plot plan from Google Views, public information. So what the plot plans have is, well, biggest thing as far as environmental health, we're looking for where the structure is going to live, where the well is, where the septic system lives, where the leach lines are at, and then in the expansion areas is what we're looking at in relation to contours and everything else. And then we relate that back to the historic as-built that we have. So this is one done. I think you submit your information and these websites produce this information for you. So this is one type that we're kind of seeing a lot of. We're seeing a lot of hand-drawn ones that are on grid paper, scaled out. They work just as good. Same information. We give them that information from contours is usually some of the harder information to get, but on the GIS there is a contour layer, and also the coordinates for where the house is going to sit. Our GIS also, you can pinpoint from the location from the view and drop a pin where the house sat or where you're going to move it to. And so, like I said, we're just same information. It's all the same information. Just we're seeing a lot of hand-drawn ones, but they work just as well. Clear, concise information where the septic system is, and getting information to all of the historic records that's available too. And we'll kind of go through how to find that and where to see it, because there is a lot of old, especially through the environmental health records, old plot plans that show where everything is to kind of basically build off of. The third type that we're seeing a lot of is obviously ones that are done by designers, engineers, design professionals. And like I said, as far as we're looking for it, it just has all the minimal information that we're looking for. They just to know that they come in all ways, shapes, and forms. And as long as it has the information and it's legible, we'll work with it. So here, it's a little busy. But I'll zoom in because I know it's not easy to read. But this is the kind of the environmental health workflow for the pre-clearances and how we determine what we're looking at, how we're determining and breaking down the applications when they come in. So I'll start off in this first section here. So basically, you have we're rebuilding. Are you rebuilding in kind? Yes or no? So we're going to get over here in this green section here that we're rebuilding in kind. There we go. So rebuilding in kind, yes. So that we taking your pre-clearance application, we have your plot plan, all your applications. First thing we do is start pulling the environmental health records to see who, what, where, how big, what we have, what we have as far as information wise. So one thing we're looking at in those environmental health records is the permitted history. If we can find any permitted history, if the system that we have on our plot plan and location matches, and the bedroom count matches. We talked about earlier that where we're living in these existing systems, we can add up to 500 square feet to these systems of habitable space without changing the bedroom count. So that's one thing we're looking at through those particular documents. And then what type of system was it? What was its functioning ability? Was it a conventional system? Was it a non-standard? Was it an advanced treatment? If we're going the conventional route, So we're going down, we're making sure conventional, everything still works. We meet our setbacks. We don't have any new information as far as groundwater, setbacks from waterways. If we have maybe expansion problems. So let's say you're building a garage, a house, and an ADU, and we just don't have physically enough space for 100% expansion. So those are things we're looking at as we're going through the pre-clearances. On the other side, the non-standard advanced treatment systems, we're looking to make sure kind of the same thing, the functionality of the system. So with those systems, we'll see, because a lot of those components are above ground, we'll ask for, prior to issuance, just to make sure, a review of the system to make sure either messaging components, drip systems, plastic components that are relatively high to ground level are still in functioning order. If they weren't, what components need to be repaired, and then depending on the extent of the repair, obtaining the correct permits to do the repairs, and ultimately get back to, some of the systems have an on-site system provider annual reportings on that end, to get back to final having those reports and those annual everything set up to move forward after it's rebuilt. So ultimately, we're just making sure that at this point, same size, in kind, we're still within 500 square feet. Everything's functional. That's really what we're looking for on this particular side of the house in the ultimate environmental health review. Now, some predate missing records. We might have to go pop over to the other side of the house, where we might have to get into like some site evaluations. And then the next slide will show over where this happens. Either the house was bigger than what was originally permitted, or we don't have necessarily any records of the system. So as part of the review, here's the link for the environmental health reviews. It's all public records. So basically, you go to the website scceh.com, and then right at the top there's Santa Cruz County Environmental Health Records. From there, it'll pop up this list of what kind of records you're looking for. For me, I just hit all documents because it'll pull anything that's associated with that address or that APN. And then you go ahead and you plop in either your APN or your address. And it'll pull up a list of any documents, historic permits, plot plans, just whatever we've have for the property over time. Another part that we look at is the assessor's website, or the assessor's website, to see what the size of the property they had as far as square footage, bedroom counts, and if it's when the year it was affected, and the legal what the actual property was. It's the best indicator of what was there prior to the fire. So same thing, I have their link at the very end of the presentation. Plop in your parcel number, your APN, and it'll pull up your property specific. So just know when you pull this up, it's going to be zeroed out because of the calamity reports for resetting the taxes. You'll just have to go, there's a little kind of baby blue thing that says historic characteristics. And then within that one, it'll pop up the historic characteristics prior to the fire. So what they were assessing you on prior to that. So part of the environmental health records, so here's an application, an original application that we look at, and it has a wealth of information for us to help with the sizing of the system. So we're obviously, I verify the APN. You'll notice there might be APNs that were retired or changed. So that's why we also check with the assessor to make sure that the APN, it's still the same property through history. You'll have a environmental health record number, obviously owner, whoever installed it, And then for us, it's the land use information down here that's really important to us as far as it's a single family residence, the water system that was served by, the total number of bedrooms that this particular permit was, and the property size. Down here, the actual specifications of the system. So it gives us what was installed: a 1,500 gallon tank, concrete. Was it a 2, 3? How many chambers? And then down here, the actual information for the leech line. So this one was 2 times 80 feet, affected depth 6 foot, which gives us that square footage of leach that we're looking for. So this, between this and this, that gives us our complete size, what the septic system was sized. And there is also a factor in Maryland over time. I can't think of when. I'm gonna have to look that up for the group. The leaching square footage over time has changed and gotten a little bit bigger. So back then, if you look at it now, it would be 960 might only be good for a 2-bedroom versus in 87 it might have been good for 3 bedrooms. So we're also looking at that as far as when this permit was done and what the history of that, what code it basically fell under as far as when it was built. Oops. And then at the very bottom we'll have inspection history. So who viewed it, inspected, finaled, and just to make sure that that's all been done. Second thing we look at in the environmental health records is the pumping reports over time. This helps us determine if there was a history of failure. So basically, if we notice that you're pumping a lot more, when they're pumping it, they're noticing that the levels are very high. So there's either the sludge is really high or the effluent levels is very high in the tank, which is letting us know that the leach fields are having a harder time either filtering. The soils might be gunked up. They just kind of let us know that there's something downstream of this system that isn't working properly. So what we match up to the previous, the applications is we have is the tank size, the types, and then what it was for. If it was just a maintenance, sales, most of them are just maintenance, but we do see them for sales and other things. And then when they pop the tank open and look in the actual tank, what the condition of the tank is. Are the pieces within the tank still operable? Were they broken? Were they working right? The operation level is a huge one. So if it's either too low, either it's perking too fast or it's perking too slow. So we want to see normal, that we know that it's for the prescribed percolation rate, it should be working in a normal level. And then there's history that says, over the last 12 years, we've noticed it's always had high levels. That kind of information there. So that's what we're looking for. And I'm looking at years upon years of these reports when we're doing these clearances, just to make sure that we have a solid history of what's going on. So then we get over to the kind of the second side of the chart, which we're not building in kind. So kind of off the bat, I already know we're not building in kind. It's either larger. We'll look at the records to verify what the size of the system was, and that helps us determine what permits will be needed, what actions will be needed on the septic side to get that system to the size of what the ultimate rebuild will be. So there's a couple factors. We're rebuilding. We're just going to be bigger. We're adding ADUs or habitable buildings to the property, or it's being moved to another side of the property where maybe you can't utilize the existing system. So basically, what those will ultimately produce is we're going to have to get into an area of a site plan evaluation, a site evaluation, which basically at that point we're going to have the design professional working with the county at this point to determine the requirements, the load, the groundwater. In some cases, we might have to re-perk for a new area. So basically gets the design parameters of what the system currently is what its capacity is, and then where, as far as the system types that we talked about earlier, non-standard, advanced treatment, or hey, you know what, we have ample expansion area. The expansion area is very like for like. We'll go into our expansion area and then we'll create this new expansion area. So there basically from there that produces the different types of permitting information. So you have what we call an upgrade permit. So we're either adding, maybe we need to add more leech lines. Maybe we're adding components to the system to get it to a larger size. Repair. In some cases where this is blue line is, let's say we didn't have, the system was maybe in failure or something. Maybe there's some repairs. It's a tank repair. Maybe it's a leech line where we're fixing the leech lines that maybe got drug from the cleanup, or just something that we can still get this system relatively, or get it work in a working functional condition. And then ultimate, if it's a new system, and then from there it drops down. You're applying for the permit. Conventional systems go through the normal environmental health or RPC, and really nothing's changed as far as the steps. It's just you're going through the RPC instead of going directly to environmental health. And then we have advanced treatment systems, which would ultimately get reviewed by the state for all advanced treatment systems. So get back down here. So the state water board reviews those advanced treatments. They're reviewing them to the exact same standards that we already have in place. There's no difference in standards. It's just as having a local board, a water board. It's a part of the state's regulatory process to review those systems. After everything's done, on this side, so this is coming down from the yellow side, your repairs, everything's good, permits issued. The clearances go, and in most cases, this is conditions of issuance for the building. So you can still concurrently, at this point, you know what you need to do environmental health wise, but you can still move forward with your building. Just knowing that going through your design, applying for your building permit, it's the turnaround time is about 7 to 10 business days for the actual building review. So at that point, you're not, by submitting, it would be in a hold pattern. So just kind of think about that. You can still kind of work through your design and get everything moving forward, but you're going to want to know that submitting that building permit earlier it's just going to kind of sit in an approved holding for the septic side of it. This other yes here is everything's functional from the blue side, conditional approval, and then apply for your building permits. And then basically what happens is when you apply for your building permits, we verify that either what was submitted in pre-clearance, so plot plan, sizing of the house matches what the actual application for the building is, and same thing on this other side here. We're comparing the submittal to what the environmental health permits was issued to. Here's a copy or an example of some of the pre-clearance letter that was not issued. So what you'll see in the letter, if it's approved, it'll say approved. It'll list what the proposed rebuild is and is for, and what the system was sized to. And then basically that would be it. But on the ones that could not be issued at that time, we'll put the size of the system, or the proposed square footage, or the proposal of what was being submitted, what the records show as far as the size of the system, and approved what it was approved for, basically. And then from there you'll have this, usually the second paragraph here is what's kind of your first step. Like I said, in most cases a site evaluation, and that's working with your designer and the environmental health RPC team to help produce the design requirements, the capability, and what they're kind of proposing as far as system wise too. With that information that gets produced in the site evaluation, that kind of gives the designer the ability to run and create a system that is sized accordingly for what the rebuild is. And the ultimate goal is to either get an upgrade permit or an actual septic system permit for that particular size. But like I said, it doesn't stop you from moving forward in your process. It's just a condition of ultimately issuance for your building permits. So getting kind of into the what an actual site evaluation is. So from the letters that we've kind of already done, I know a lot of people want to keep moving forward in the process, and so they'll say, I want a site evaluation. This produces a bunch of information for basically for the design professional to design a system for you. So basically it ensures that the soil is permeable and will accept the wastewater. So we're looking at percolation rates that we know from our mapping systems. So fast, medium, slow. If there was any, let's say there was a perk test on your property, what was that? So kind of that historic information, we look at that first. We'll do a site evaluate, actually get onto the site, take a look at the soils, what's actually out there for the areas that we're looking to put a system at. And that helps. That's why we ask that you have your either consultant or your septic contractor or somebody there that kind of knows where they want to put this system at. What are they kind of looking at proposal wise? But it's basically we're looking through the soils, the historic information, the different the known areas of how the water tables are at. And what you're close to waterways wise is really what we're looking at, to make sure that kind of give them everything they need as far as a physical assessment of the parcel, and then evaluating the soils. In some cases, if there's no information or they're going into kind of questionable areas, a percolation test would be done. And when that's done is you'll have a consultant, a contractor, they'll dig actual test pits, and we all monitor what the actual perk is for those particular areas. And they'll do a few test pits. We'll learn what the soils are, how deep they are, where the water tables are at. And that's usually if we don't have that information available. And in some cases, when we're moving the system to another part of the parcel or kind of an area that was not developed, we won't have that information. So in most cases, if we're moving or enlarging it quite substantially, we're going to be into the point where we'll do a percolation test with the consultant. We kind of talked a little bit before about the different types of permits. So repair permits, there's a major and a minor repair. The major repairs are anything made, basically consisting, if we're getting into the leach fields area, that's what we're going to be in the major repair. The minor repairs are anything small. We're changing distribution boxes. We're fixing tight lines. We're fixing the line between the tank and the leach fields. Some of the above ground components for some of the alternative systems, the non-standard and advanced treatment systems. If we're changing out monitoring panels, alarms, stuff like that, would be considered minor. And then we have tank only permits. So just a replacing of a tank. What we're going to verify is we'll need a plot plan of where the tank is, and then basically what type of tank you're replacing it with. So obviously we'll be at 1,500 gallons, but then we'll have to look and see if we're replacing it with an improved tank off the list. Below are some of the fees down here for these particular types of permits. And we'll get into an upgrade permits. So like we have upgrade permits and we have new system permits. So upgrades, everything's going through the RPC. We're working with the designer. They basically have given that information after a site evaluation, and they determine they're adding maybe a clarifier. You know what we're doing? We're adding filters, or we're changing. The new line is going to be a chamber system versus a normal system. So basically, they're taking that information from that site review. We're taking that existing system and we're adding components to make it either a bigger system, larger system, or we're helping it get to a point where it can add that demand or that load to it. Same thing with the new systems we talked about. There's the non-standard side of it. They go through the RPC, and then the enhanced treatment part of it that goes through the state ultimately for review. We will help put together some information with the state of what their submittals look like, their fees, and just help get to them the most complete submittals, because that will ultimately help on their side to look at these reviews and not have that back and forth. And then kind of finally, I'll kind of reach out to to Dr. Underwood about the LAMP and the state and kind of where we're at with the regional board to kind of close out.
Sorry, multitasking here. So right now we are not able to take the enhanced treatment plans and approve them, as we do not have what is called the local area management plan in place yet. We're now shooting for a deadline, I hope in October, to be able to take it to the regional board. And what are we taking to the regional board? Basically, not only what is the LAMP, this is a document that talks about how are we going to meet state minimum standards that are now in effect for all counties, that as they go about approving septic systems. It used to be each jurisdiction could approve their own ordinances around setbacks and these kind of things to water wells, percolation rates, all these kind of things. But then they found that there was quite a bit of groundwater contamination and surface water contamination happening across the state that was coming from these septic systems and resulting in, impacts to people, city water and other drinking water in rural areas. And it happened here, both in the San Lorenzo Valley was the primary location, but certainly in other places in our county. And so the state stepped in and said, no longer can locals just determine all this. We're going to set state minimum standards that you all have to incorporate into your local ordinances so that we don't see these impacts to people's drinking water and to the surface waters that are also affecting our environment. So that's what we're doing. We're rewriting the ordinance. We've been working on it for a while now. We did have a version out for public comment in the fall, and we will be having a second version out in sometime soon, we hope. And ultimately, we hope the LAMP will be taken to the regional board in October for approval. Now, it does mean that right now, that means you have to submit to your application for an enhanced treatment review of the plan to the regional board. Eventually, it would come to us for the review of the plan. But I will say in either case, it's still they are reviewing the plan based on the minimum standards that apply, that the state is applying. And when it comes back to us, we will also be applying the same state minimum standards. So it's not like there's any break by waiting to come back to us versus the regional board application at the same time. The same state minimum standards apply.
Thank you.
So,
thank you. Thank you for clearing that up. Let's see. And last but not least, the links for kind of what we talked about, environmental health records, assessors, GIS will be a wealth of knowledge for the plot plans, the disposal ordinance, sewage disposal ordinance, if you ever want some light bedtime reading, and then just the website to the recovery center that has a lot of this information and a copy of this PowerPoint and the presentation. And then we'll, I guess, get into any questions, comments, or anything you want to hear.
So thank you so much, Marcus. That covered both, both the technical and the general. So that was really great. Let's do the questions in an organized manner. There are 2 streams for asking questions. We've been answering as we can in the chat, and I will continue to do that during the question and answer period. But then also, this is new for me, but I think I can handle it. We'll have you raise your hands. I'll scan for raised hands and unmute you one at a time. I'll say your name that's on the screen so you know that you're being unmuted, and then you also must unmute yourself. So both unmutings must happen. And again, we're trying for the general in the questions, and there's always that invitation to call the RPC and schedule yourself a full hour to talk about your details. Okay, So I'm going to start with a couple that are still open in the chat. There was a question about fees and a request to put the fee slide back up. I just want to let Rosemary know that this entire presentation will be put on the website. There is a section under rebuilding and recovery that says events, and then you click on that, it says past events, and that's where the chat is preserved, and you can see the PowerPoint and the recording. So let's see, having said that, I see my first hand. So this is Dave Newberry. Let's see if I need to do anything or if you can begin.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you very much.
Okay, my question is, I'm concerned about this rainy season test that obviously isn't happening this year. I understand that has to happen after at least 60% of the annual rainfall has occurred. Of course, we're probably at about 30 right now, which obviously is not going to come to 60 this year. So what does that mean? No groundwater test then available, right?
Okay, that technical question, I think I'll give to Marcus if you've got it. If not, Marilyn.
He's correct. There's we might not be able to open up now. Working with some of the alternative methods, Marilyn, to
Well, I would just say first, and is that if you're rebuilding, obviously we should have some information about the wet weather already. This wet weather testing often applies just to new building, but again, we're going to look back in the records and see if we have some information that would give us insight as to what is your groundwater levels during the wet weather. So that would be the ideal, that we have something already and not have to wait.
There's no records for the property.
Okay, well, again, these might be a site-specific thing if we can infer from other nearby properties. I'd hate to be specific with you about Dave, but obviously the desire is, we don't know when we're going to have the next wet weather, right? So,
right. I know there's some years, there's gone 2 or 3 years without being able to do a groundwater level test, a rainy season test.
Right.
So I'm concerned now about whether to even proceed, whether I should just sell and go to Kansas.
So to be honest with you, again, this is a very site-specific question you're asking, Dave.
Right.
So I think it's best if we take it offline, but we're certainly we want to be able to find solutions without having to wait for you guys for that wet weather. Really, this would be more for like new constructional properties that have never been developed before, that we'd hope that we have to, unfortunately, we do ask those folks to wait to get to a wet weather test.
Okay, I guess I'll call in.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to respond to a question that there was in the chat, which is about fees. And the question was, the questioner thought that there was some, acknowledges that some fees have been waived and reduced, but she thought that they would be waived or reduced across the board, including in environmental health. And so my response to that is that the Board of Supervisors has waived and reduced certain fees where they can. I am not aware of any plan or anyone having stated that there was a commitment to reduce fees across the board. The board did that in a strategic way to waive and reduce the ones that they could. And of course, the context for that is that the fees fund the Recovery Permit Center, among other services. So thank you for the question. So I am having difficulty seeing raised hands, and I'm going to ask Marcus or Marilyn if they know what I need to do to see those.
So I am seeing Bill with parentheses guest having a raised hand in my
That's
view.
me.
Okay, so Marilyn, since you apparently can see them and I can't, would you be willing to do the calling of the raised hands?
Sure, and it sounds like Bill is already unmuted, so
Yeah.
go for it.
Yeah, it's kind of along the same lines as the question Dave said, but in a different area of opportunity. So we have some neighbors that have already just decided that they're right up next to our property, and they're in their 70s, and they've decided that they just can't tolerate the pain of going through all of what's necessary to build again. And so they offered the property to many neighbors, and we were the only ones that could even come in the ballpark of what they kind of needed to let go. And what I'm wondering is, what is the finite lifespan of, how long will the county allow for us to sit on this property before, I don't know if we have this rainy season issue. I probably doubt it, because the home was very large on a very small lot. It was vastly expensive considering the neighborhood, and it had a really fancy pumping septic system. But our house, between 7 next door neighbors, we lost 5 of them, and we're just kind of taking on this burden. But I'm hoping that it's not a stupid decision. If it takes 3 years to get permits and all this stuff done, and then all of a sudden we're out of luck, that would be pretty bad. But is there any kind of general concept of what timeline people have to get all this stuff done with all the hurdles?
Yeah.
So can I just say there's 2 things. The RPC will be around, I think we've got a commitment of around 3 years, but under our septic calamity, that's good for 10 years of rebuilding within 10 years. So the sort of, because if you understand, and when we enact a new ordinance around the fall of this year or the beginning of next year, there will be yet new setback requirements for new construction and upgrades and such. But for you folks, this 10-year calamity for rebuilding within 10 years will apply even with the new septic ordinances coming on. That helps.
Yeah, and I'm guessing, I know it's probably not the right way to go, but with the removal of the house and all the other stuff that's on that small lot, it opened up an opportunity for the prior, really old conventional septic system to be built instead of having the pump system. So
right,
kind of hopeful, but I've heard about this, 1,000 days that you have to rebuild or else you can't ever build again. That's just a myth, but I don't know.
Yeah, and that makes me want to jump in. So thank you, Bill. And it makes total sense that this won't happen fast for many, many people, and we are aware of that, and understanding of it. So the myth of the 1,000 days is exactly that. It's not helpful to people to hear that and kind of panic. So really, when you hear things that cause you concern, call the RPC and find out whether it's really accurate or not, because I hate to see people having upset added on top of upset because of misinformation. To be crystal clear about this, it does seem that what you have to keep your eye on is the septic related 10 years. But as far as being treated as a rebuild, whatever that means through the planning process, that doesn't end. Our contract with the RPC is for up to 3 years. I don't know that they'll be here that long, but when they are not here, we'll do a fire recovery permit in the regular planning department according to all the fire recovery rule changes that have been made to facilitate rebuilding. So the framework will still be in place for you whenever you get to it, except I'm hearing that you do have a 10-year time frame on septic. So that's the thing to focus on. But there's no 1,000 days involved here.
That's huge. Thank you very much.
I'll get off my soapbox.
I was just going to say, I don't know if people know that are on the phone how you raise your hands, but I know how to do it on the computer. It's a little, I think, more tricky if you're on your phone or device, handheld device. But there is an, if you hover, you'll see there a place where there's like a little hand person like this raising. And if you click on that, you can click to raise your hand. And I'll be honest with you, if you want to put it in your chat, you can't figure out how to do that. You can also put it in the chat that you have a question.
You have to lower your hand also.
Yeah, thank you. And I
So
see Dave again having is that I think Dave lowered and then raised his hand again. So
Yes, I have a further question. You just mentioned the new requirements coming up in October. I wonder if you'd comment on that and how much of a concern that is, and maybe perhaps what else we might anticipate over the next 10 years.
well, so again, they wouldn't apply to you. In other words, the folks that have been impacted by the burn.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I guess that's what I was trying to tell you, that if you, as long as you rebuild within 10 years, if you're going outside that 10-year time period, then you might be affected. And, you know, these new rules might affect you. In some cases it won't, because they, you know, you have a big enough property, you have sufficient setback to groundwater, you got your, you know, those kind of things.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to switch over to see if there are any questions to pick up in the chat. And there are some long ones. Let's see. Here's a question. What is the distance a septic system has to be from the toilet room? For example, they're not going to rebuild on the old footprint, but in a different location. This person is on a 5-acre parcel. So is there a distance to the septic from the fixture?
So the tank would be from the foundation or bearing point would be 5 feet. Water lines, I added it into the chat because there's different aspects of like the water line, the well. There's other than just the toilet room, there's other distances for the tank and the leach line, and I just added them both to the chat.
Okay, great. And I see that long posting is from you as a response. So thank you, Marcus. And let's see, here's another one. What if we had a primary home and an ADU? What is the time limit if we want to rebuild the ADU? And then there was a response from Marcus for the benefit of everybody. There's no time limit after you rebuild the home. It will fall under the normal policy. So the chat is clear. Let's see whether any other hands have been raised.
I don't see any yet.
I do not see any either. So we'll hang out for a little while because I expect there must be more questions. And I very much appreciate the one at a time and people being super respectful of each other.
I think Andrea is trying to raise her hand in the old fashioned where you on camera way.
Oh, perfect. Okay, Andrea, let's see if you're unmuted now.
Do you hear me?
We do, thank you.
Oh, good. Well, yeah, after listening to this presentation today, Kansas is looking more attractive. Well, I built I'm out on Swanton Road, and we had a main house and an ADU that burned. The ADU was unpermitted, and I had put a septic tank in also there, but I don't know how big of a septic tank or how big of a leach line there was there. I wasn't present when the leach line and the septic tank was put in. Now I'm, you know, of course, I did apply for the pre-clearance, and you had no record of the septic tank being put in. So basically, how do I find out how big of a septic tank I had and the leach line? And do I have to tear the whole thing up in order to find that, get that information? And And how do I do that?
So the avenue would be a site evaluation. We would get a contractor out there as far as a representative from the RPC to look. Like they're going to have to expose the tank so we can see what obviously what's its size, and then locate the leach lines and figure out either expose the top so we can see how tall and how they were constructed to make sure they meet the standards. From that information, depending on what we find, we can kind of figure out the avenues of repair, upgrade, or if in the worst case scenario, if it had to be a completely new system. But that's the site evaluation would give you the avenue of that we can go out there with a contractor or consultant to look and see what's actually been installed and how it was installed.
So I should get in touch with the RPC in order and talk to you about getting a site evaluation.
Correct. Yeah. So the only thing we'll need somebody up there to expose some of those components so we can see how they were done.
Okay. Can I do that in advance? Because I do have a person with a backhoe and they can kind of get in there, kind of gently scrape it. You know, I don't want to destroy the existing septic tank if I don't have to.
Yeah. You can schedule an appointment. We can get everything, all the paperwork and everything situated, and then schedule a time so we can all meet out there.
Okay. Thank you, Marcus.
No problem.
Thank you very much.
All right. We have a question from Tara Barsanti about what preparation needs to be made before a septic inspection. It may depend on the type of inspection.
Correct. It'll depend on the type of system and what part of the system we're looking at. If it's the tank, there might be a watertight test. The leech lines, depending on the type of leech lines, is chamber versus normal. There'll be, just like a building inspection, it goes in phases. So really, it's really dependent on the system, though, what actual type of system we're doing. Because some of the advanced treatments will have maybe some electrical inspections and some prep inspections of a base before they start building up their specific components.
The one thing I would suggest is, and this is kind of also something Andrea Tischler brought up, is it's important to check in with the RPC before you do certain preparation, and because you want to make sure you're doing, you know, exactly the thing that needs to be done and not some extra thing where, you know, we'll say we needed something different. So really great if you check in with them prior. Okay, there's kind of a site-specific one in here. I will respond to him separately. I'm going to check for hands again. And I am not seeing an indication that anybody's got a raised hand. Are there any other burning questions out there about septic or permitting of septic? All right, well, we have reached the time anyway. It's a little after 11:30. I think we'll just end with thanks for joining us. You know who to call. The time to call them is anytime. And we really wish all of you the best. And we're here to help with the permitting. And I'm actually now seeing a hand. So let me check on that just under the wire. Jeff Northam has his hand raised. Okay, Jeff, feel free to ask your question.
Okay, sorry about the last minute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. One question I have, I realized just a week or so ago that our entire area of our house is within the, I guess it's the watershed, whatever the heck it is, what's indicating. In fact, they encompassed everything up to our front porch. And our septic tank, and of course, everything is about 60 feet further back in. Does that immediately negate us being able to rebuild there with the septic if it's within this watershed or whatever this line's supposed to indicate?
Not necessarily. Depends on. So this will be super lot specific when we pull up the information, but almost all the properties down in certain areas are in watersheds that have
This is White House
septic
Canyon.
systems.
So
What was that?
I'm located in White House Canyon. So our house was probably like 150 feet from the stream.
Okay, so that's what we'll look at to see what that distance is from the stream is. That's going to be the more important information.
Right.
It's the distance from the stream.
Because we had it for, I was there for 28 years and we never had problems. So there won't be a whole lot of record. It was permitted, but we didn't, other than having it pumped out, and we purchased it in 93. We never had any problems. It always worked perfectly. And I never had any indications that anything was leaking out of the soil into the stream or anything. In fact, of course, our stream up there, even in wet years, goes dry by August at the latest anyhow.
Okay, yeah. If you wanna reach out to me, I'll put my email address in there, and we can pull up the information because that'll be super lot specific as far as where that system actually sits in relation to everything else. But just by being in a watershed area does not push you into that. It's really determined by the bodies of water and water tables that in those particular areas.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
All right. Wrapping up. Thanks again. Have a wonderful weekend. Come see us if you need anything. Bye-bye.